we are moving on to Japan, and so we want to start looking at how Japan compares and contrasts with another country we've looked at, like China. So think about that throughout this unit. How did Japan's development after 1800 compare with China's? Don't forget all of the things we talked about with China, because those are all still important context that you need throughout this new unit. Um, so this is where we're going. I do want to give you some context on the Tokugawa Shogunate and the daimyo, and then we'll move on to the readings with Matthew Perry and the Harris Treaty. So, real fun exercise. Think about what comes to your mind when you hear the word Japan. You know, what you associate with Japan. Sometimes this is called word association, and sometimes if someone hears sky, they might think blue. When you hear Japan, what do you think of? Do you think of Japanese food? Do you think of origami? And here is a couple of examples of Japanese origami. Here's sumo wrestling. Video games, whether it be Nintendo or Sony, you might think about Pokemon, Pikachu, samurai are always very popular, and something you might not think of would be an American company like McDonald's. And here you can see McDonald's in Japan. But I show this example for a reason, because the American influence in Japan is just going to continue to be more and more prominent after the 1800s, and we're going to see this pattern emerging in Japan's development. So that's why I want to show that the Americanization is a huge part of Japan's development after the 1800s. So, real quick, we're going to look at these sources from Matthew Perry and U.S. President Millard Fillmore. That's in the 1850s. That was taking place during the Tokugawa Shogunate, named after this guy, Tokugawa Ieyasu. It's just important for you to know that he's the founder of this shogunate that's in place throughout the 1600s and into 1868, and he became the shogun. He ended up moving the government to Edo, which today is Tokyo. So just be aware of that. And I showed this before. Gotta move my head again. So during the shogunate, the emperor is at the top of this social hierarchy, but he's not really running the government. He's more of a figurehead. He's got nobility around him who act as advisors, but really the chief executive here is the shogun. The shogun is the one who's in charge, and the daimyo are the nobility who own certain rice lands. We'll mention that in a second. So when Tokugawa moved the government from Kyoto to Edo, you can see this line here I've drawn from one to the other, and so people had to take this road, the Kaido Road, and this became a huge hub for trade and commerce and those kinds of things, interaction, because everyone has to travel to Edo to take part in the government. The daimyo, these are the Japanese nobility, and they own regions of taxable rice land. And this is an image that shows the different clans, daimyo groups. So you can see Japan is at this point during the Tokugawa Shogunate has a lot of different groups of people. It's not really a nationalized country, but that's going to come. That comes next. So a lot of people talk about Japan being isolated before the United States emerges. I don't like that depiction of Japan. So when you think about Japan being isolated, you think about it being completely cut off, sectioned off from the rest of the world. It's just this own little island that it's not going to have any interaction with anybody else. And that's just not true. So to give you some examples, it's true that in the 1600s, the Japanese began to push out a lot of Western groups. So they kicked out the Spanish, they kicked out the Portuguese, they let the Dutch stay, but They liked the Dutch. That they kicked out Spanish and the Portuguese. They banned Christianity, and they banned foreign travel. So Japanese people couldn't even really leave the islands in Japan. So yeah, it's true that after the mid 1600s, Japan was pushing away from all this global interaction, but it was not isolated. I think a better way to describe this is that Japan was secluded. There's a period of seclusion. And just to give you some examples, even though Japan is secluded, it was still interacting with other places. So it still traded with China. It still imported a lot of books from the West, a lot of scientific books, and it was still mining silver and then exporting that silver to other places. So Japan was not completely isolated from the rest of the world. Um, but what's going to happen here in the 1850s is that the United States is going to arrive. And so this is a painting of the Matthew Perry's ships, and you can see at the bottom it says U.S. Japan Fleet, Commodore Matthew Perry, carrying the gospel of God to the heathen, 1853. The Japanese had never seen ships like this before. They are fueled by coal and powered by steam. So this was very significant development for the Japanese to see these foreigners coming onto their soil. This is a photograph of Matthew Perry, and you can see him there. The Japanese drew pictures of him, and you can see whether or not you think this is accurate. So focus on that picture of Perry. I'm going to go back and forth. So there's Perry, and then there's the painting, the Japanese painting of Perry. And I'll just go back and forth one more time. You can see I focus on the eyes. His eyes seem to be very distinct in both images. But the Japanese were definitely paying attention to Perry's arrival. And there's another image of Perry's expedition, and you can see all the different people the Japanese depict in this image, as well as the ship. So let's just look at the people first. I'll move my head again so you can see this. So up here is supposed to be Matthew Perry, okay? And then here is a translator, and you can see him poring over documents. This is a surveyor. This is a commander. This is an infantry squadron leader. Infantry squad leader. This is a captain who is doing administrative work at a desk. And down here, you've got an infantryman, you've got a musician, and you've got a black sailor. The point here is that the Japanese are very inquisitive, and they're paying attention to all these details about these Americans who've come to their soil. You can see how much they pay attention to details. They draw these figures fairly accurately. They all have different colors, so you see the attention to detail with the colors of the uniforms, the colors of the things that they've got with them, the fact that they've got things with them. The Japanese were very observant, and it's interesting that they're depicting the black sailor just like they're depicting everybody else, even the musician. These are not people of high rank. Commodore Perry is the one with the highest rank, and everyone else falls beneath him. But this depiction pays close attention to all of them, not just to one or two of them. If you look at the ship, though, the ship's interesting. It's sort of a caricature. The ship has all this black plumes of smoke. It looks menacing. There's a face over here. There's another sort of face over here. And so it just looks very demonic almost, very evil. Certainly the Japanese are paying attention to what's happening with Matthew Perry coming to their shores. And that's why I wanted you to look at these sources. So think about when you read these letters, there are three different ones. One's from the president, Millard Fillmore, and the other two are from Perry. How would you describe the president's tone, and what does he want compared to Perry's tone and the goals that he wants? And then, if you had been the shogun at the time, how would you have reacted to these letters? And I should point out that it's interesting, when you look at these letters, they are addressed to the Emperor of Japan. But the emperor is not the one really in control. It's the shogun. But I think that reveals something about the ignorance of the Americans at that time. They didn't realize. They figured the emperor was the highest rank, and they addressed everything to him. But it would have been the shogun who would have been more likely to deal with the United States and form some kind of trade negotiations. The United States does force the Japanese to trade with them, and so this is a picture of U.S. Consul General Townsend Harris, who is the Harris Treaty is often named after him. He negotiates this treaty. It further opens up relations between the U.S. and Japan. So when Perry comes by 1854, the U.S. forced the Japanese to enter into trade relations, and that treaty, Kanagawa, we don't really focus on, but that's one of the first of the unequal treaties. You might remember this from looking at China and the Treaty of Nanjing. That's the first unequal treaty, and then the Treaty of Kanagawa is another unequal treaty, and then so is this Harris Treaty. But these treaties end Japanese seclusion. Japanese seclusion is over after this. So what is your reaction to the Harris Treaty? Think about it in comparison to the Treaty of Nanjing, and think about, is it really as bad as the Treaty of Nanjing? So look at how the British treated the Chinese in 1842. Look at how the Americans are treating the Japanese in 1858. That's all I got, ladies and gentlemen. So don't forget to be reading the next set of documents. Keep reading the textbook. The textbook chapter is a chapter we've looked at before on China, but the page numbers are specifically related to Japan. And you might find this crash course video really useful that I've listed here. So it's all on Canvas as well. So take a look at that. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.